Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our private well class webinar for June 2024. Is my water safe to drinks? Common questions about private wells. This is hosted by the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois, and it's funded through the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and US EPA. This is part of the private well class program. If you're not familiar, you'll learn about that today. And for those of you who have not taken a 10-lesson class, this is not one of those 10 lessons. This is a webinar in support of all that. Thanks for joining us today. And yeah, we'll move on. This is part of a national program. EPA funds RCAP, and we work with RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, to support private well owners across the country. There are 23 million private wells serving about 58 million people in the country, which is 18% of our population, a lot more than most people realize. This webinar, as I said, follows and supports our well owner course or class, if you will, that's available at privatewellclass.org. This is not one of those lessons, though. It's the lessons are PDFs that are emailed to you once a week. It's all free, and again, I'll explain that in a little while. As we go through this, if you're a LEHP or can get continuing education credit through NEHA, we are a provider. As far as our continuing education guidelines, you can only take this particular class or webinar once every credentialing cycle, which is 2 years for them. And I've listed below in the lower right the other times we've offered the same class, the same webinar. I say that the beginning part of this is the same as it was in February, but the questions you all asked are always different, or we try to answer different questions. And so the second half of this especially will be different every time based on the questions that all the participants have asked us in advance. So, but as far as getting credit today, if you were at the February webinar and got credit for it then, if you're still under the same credentialing cycle, you can't get credit a second time. But if your credentialing cycle is reset since then, like beginning of this month, then you're okay for that. We also offer Illinois LEHP credit. That's the only state right now that we're able to do that for. It's actually a fair amount of work, and we are small staff, and trying to get state-specific credit available for environmental health professionals just isn't something we've got the bandwidth to do. In support of your CE efforts here today, though, we do have a number of handouts, and we can help with the NEHA forms. Any questions, one, look at the handouts that are available, and two, you can email us at info@privatewellclass.org, and we can help you with that after. We have typically around 100 to 130 people who seek CEs through us every month. And so I want to remind everybody to be patient. One person takes care of all that, Katie Buckley, who's on the call today, and it's a lot of work. So give her some time to get those things done. I mentioned I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist here at the Water Survey. And I mentioned Katie Buckley, who is also a part of our private well class team. And also on today is Sally Dolan, a senior scientific specialist. She's also an EHP, and Sally's been with us since last August, and she manages our hotline and help center, which as well as a number of other things. But on the private well side, this is why she's included. And the hotline, which we launched April 1, and help center is actually a fair amount of effort. We take a lot of calls from folks and provide information to a lot of folks every day. So the first thing we need to do is a poll question. Please answer this. This is one way we can track, especially if you're getting CEs. You're expected to answer this. It's really just to help us understand who our audience is. And so Katie's going to open that poll. You should see it now. And we'll give you a minute or so to complete that. And
Yep, so I've launched the poll question. We'll keep it open for a little less than 60 seconds here. I do realize that the attendees here today may fit in more than one category listed in the poll question. So just go ahead and select the answer that best describes you on the webinar today. So, okay, we have 86% voted. Give it maybe 10 more seconds.
yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. Let me go ahead and close the webinar poll question here, and then I'll show the answers, and then you should be good to go. All right, a little less than half are well owners today, which is great. And then everybody else falls into some sort of well professional, regulatory agency, or stakeholder. All right, I will go ahead and hide the poll question, Steve, and then you're good to go.
Thanks. All right, it's great to have so many well owners on today. Sometimes it's a smaller percentage, so it's probably, it's one of the bigger ones we've had for a little while. It's awesome. So I want to mention a few things first. One is RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. So we have this grant from US EPA, and it's a national program, and RCAP works in every state. They have 6 regional affiliates that make up this partnership, and they're mentioned there. RCAC, for instance, is the Western RCAP. They're based in Sacramento, but they cover the states in green there. It's RCAC. They have staff, though, in every state, and each region has one or more private well staff who work with well owners directly, set up workshops, working with health departments or extension or a state agency. If you are a well owner, one of the things that they offer is a well assessment. They'll come to your house and look at your well. It's not really an inspection per se. It's just to identify where there might be vulnerabilities. Do you have a secure well cap? Are you storing things near your well? Do you have your dog tied to your well? A lot of different things. You see everything when you're out in the field, from having a Folgers can as the cap for your well to having a well in a basement or in a garage. So it's free to the homeowner, and in many cases it includes a free water sample. And so if you're interested in that as a well owner, you can contact us and we can get you to the right folks based on what state you're in, or you can contact these affiliates on your own. But we work with them directly. The 6 leads on the private well side and our team work together regularly, and we give them a lot of leads, if you will, and then they would contact you and set up a time. And again, it's all free, it's all confidential, and it's a way to understand, some of the best practices you might need to consider as a well owner to keep your well safe or your water safe. The other side of this, on the professional side, these folks do workshops and events. So if you're putting on an event for well owners in your jurisdiction, or even for other professionals, they speak a lot at Drillers Association meetings or extension conferences or public health related state conferences. I know we speak at the Illinois Environmental Health Association meetings almost. There's 3 different regions here, and we speak at all of them almost every year. So hit them up for that, or you can contact me or us again, and we will hook you up with the right people. And if they're available, they can set that up. They'll help you organize a workshop too. If you want to have a workshop for your well owners, they're more than willing to work with you on those things. A really good partner, actually. We've had a great relationship. We started working with RCAP in 2009, and we're still going strong. I want to mention the well assessment. It's for a well or a spring. It's a fillable PDF today, but it's so they would just fill this information out, how you use your water. I guess I skipped that. What kind of pipes you have in your home, just everything you can think of related to your well and water use. And so it's like a sanitary survey for those of you who are familiar with those for public water utilities, but it's for private wells. Of course, this is voluntary and it's not required like it is for a community water supply. It's also a chance to educate a well owner about their specific situation and well. And if you're someone who's been to a lot of homes with wells, everyone is a little different. There's always a different situation, whether it's a different kind of treatment, a different type of well, different type of piping in the home, whatever it might be. Rarely are two water systems on private wells identical. And so it's a chance to then go through that with the homeowner and help them understand their specific situation, as well as promote best practices, why you should test every year. And it also then encourages communication and increase their awareness of what issues they may have. We get a lot of well owners who contact us and say, well, I don't want to call my health department. And, my first question is why? They're there to help you. And people are afraid that they will not allow them to use their well if there's something in it. I will say that, 10 years ago, I could say without a doubt, no jurisdiction could condemn your well, if you will. We have run across a few local health districts in the Northeast part of the country where they do have that authority or have given themselves that sort of authority. So it's always good to ask. But again, they're there to help and make sure that you're keeping yourself and your family safe and your water quality isn't going to cause you any problems. So it's a really good deal, especially because by doing an assessment, most of the time they're also doing testing, and it's free to you. So it's all funded by the US EPA, and so we're able to offer those kind of services. They've done over 3,600 of these around the country. And again, it's really a great opportunity. We also have an on-site wastewater treatment system assessment for your septic, or if you have an advanced wastewater treatment system in your home. This was just developed this last year, and around October, I think we got it completed. And so many times, if you are also on septic, they could do both of these at once. This is a new tool where the private well assessment has been around since 2017 and has been tweaked and modified a number of times as we learn things about different types of wells in different parts of the country. This is brand new, so this right now, RCAP folks are piloting this around the country, and after this year, they're going to provide us with the changes they'd like to see, and we'll modify this a little bit. But it's a fillable PDF again, and it's a chance to help a homeowner understand their on-site wastewater system and some of the best practices that go along with that. So, and not every, but many well owners are on septic. We also have the opposite, where someone may not be a private well owner, but they do have a septic or an on-site system. And so this can be used as an either or as well. And this is just some of the sections that are there. Septic systems or on-site systems can be pretty advanced today, depending on the situation and what needs to be discharged and the rules around that. So there's a lot of advanced systems that remove certain contaminants before it's released. So we're at the State Water Survey, which in Illinois, we're fortunate to have both a State Geological Survey and a State Water Survey. We're both divisions of the Prairie Research Institute at the University of Illinois. But the Water Survey was started by the state legislature in 1895 because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks. So our first job was to investigate water quality in community water supplies around the state. And I know in the first 2 or 3 years, they sampled over 2,000 wells in Illinois from city water supplies. And this is at a time when many didn't have any kind of treatment yet. Chlorine wasn't in use yet, except in a few larger cities. And we were just learning about all of the issues related to waterborne disease. And so today the Water Survey is it's an education and outreach tool. We do a lot of applied research. We also provide service to citizens in Illinois and beyond. We provide services to cities related to their wells or their surface water intakes and some of those issues. We have a lab that supports research to look at water quality issues, and we do a lot of climate work. The state climatologist is housed here, as well as the state hydrologist. And we have projects that are funded by different agencies like FEMA. We're one of the map approvers for Illinois for FEMA adjusted flood maps, along with these programs we run through EPA. We house the state's well logs. So when an engineering firm or a homeowner buys property, they can contact us and get a copy of a log if it's available. All these kind of services, and it allows us to learn a lot about the groundwater in Illinois and beyond. And so it's actually, it's a pretty cool place to work. Historically, like I said, we've been here since 1895. This is in a lab in 1920. This is collecting a water sample at an old hand pump in a park in a small community in Illinois. You can see the tin cup laying on the ground there just past the pump. This is the way it was, right? Everybody drank water out of that tin cup and it just sat there. Got rusty and had bugs in it. You just cleaned it out and you took a drink. And so a long history of doing those sorts of things, working with well drillers in Illinois. This is Kickapoo Drilling Company is a driller here in Illinois that we've worked with in the past, installing some monitoring wells around the state. So the important things to remember here, private wells aren't regulated. And that's to say once they're installed. So there are regulations in every state but 2 on well construction and using a licensed driller. But once you have a well, the water quality is not regulated to ensure that every time you take a drink that, someone's tested it like it is for a community water supply. So as the owner of basically a very small water system, it's your responsibility to make sure your water's safe and that the system's maintained. If a pump fails, it's on you to pay for it. Whereas on a public water supply, if a pump fails, that's just part of the cost of doing business, if you will, and providing water to your community. And you can't go by taste or look or smell. Contaminants can be odorless, colorless, or have no taste. A good example is arsenic. It's naturally occurring in the ground. We have areas in Illinois where arsenic is fairly high and it has to be treated for in every private well if a homeowner chooses to, and you can't taste it, see it, or smell it. So I grew up on an old dug well that was only 14 foot deep, but now I live in town and I pay $60 to $80 a month for my water. And that's a cost spread out over 150,000 residents or so. So they sample it, they maintain all the infrastructure, they do all the maintenance on pumps and treatment and everything else to ensure that when I turn on my tap in my home, I have safe water to drink. If you're a homeowner with a well, this is your responsibility. And so it's actually, it sounds like a lot, but the more you learn about your well and the components and all those things, the better either you will be at either trying to mitigate those issues if you have any, or at least ask better questions when you need to talk to someone like a drilling contractor or a health department or whatever. So it's important to understand, is my point, as much as you can about your well, your water system, where your water comes from, all those things. And yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So the things that we impress on everyone is that you need to know about your well. If you have your well log, if you can find your well log, that's something everyone should do. You need to know where your water is coming from. What's the depth, how deep is your well, how much of that is casing, if it's a bedrock well, where's your pump set if it's submersible, and if it has a screen, where at and how long is it. So we're not going to go into well types today, but a bedrock well is very different from a sand and gravel well, which is very different from a hand dug or bored large diameter well. And knowing those differences can help you be prepared and understand what things you need to be concerned about. So Again, there are naturally occurring contaminants, and there may be your state agency. For instance, someone in Illinois could call us. I can tell you which aquifers in Illinois are concerned for arsenic or other constituents. That's the case in most states. And I'll go through a couple examples of that, I think, today. But by going through our class and attending these webinars and hearing everybody else's questions as well as your own, it'll help you learn to ask the right questions and understand who you can contact for information locally, which they'll know more. Someone in Georgia will know much more about the aquifers in Georgia and the water situation there than I will. And so it's always best to work with local folks if you can. And lastly, sample your well. It's estimated that 2/3 of well owners have never tested their well. It may be perfectly fine, and that's the case the majority of the time, but if you haven't tested, you don't know. Okay, so about water testing. That's usually the biggest question I know today. The questions you all provided in advance that we went through, which I think there were over 80 or 90 questions today. Many of them were about testing or collecting samples or what should I test for or how often, all those sorts of things. It's by far one of the most important things you can do to understand your water quality and what's going on with the water you're drinking in your home. And so as far as collecting the sample, you need to understand that by running through the pipes in your home and any kind of treatment you have, whether it's a filter, a water softener, an RO unit, whatever it might be, that's going to chemically change the chemistry of the water. And so the water at your kitchen sink might be very different from the water at an outside tap or spigot that's right by the well, that's going straight, it's not running through any of that stuff. Or even going through the pipes in your home. If you have copper or lead or galvanized pipes in your house, that could, depending on the water quality, change the chemistry. So what we have always done, well, let me go back. Until 2008, we were allowed to offer free water testing for any private well owner in Illinois. And so because of that, and it was funded through the state, we asked well owners to collect 2 samples, one at their kitchen sink, and then one at an outside spigot where we'd ask them to let it run, and it's actually a groundwater sample. Once the pump's kicked on, it's getting fresh groundwater in the well. We collect one of those samples as well. So we understand the difference between drinking water in the home and what the groundwater source water is. And since 2008, now there's a fee, so it's really not on, we can't ask a well owner to do that. And so we don't collect much of that data anymore on the groundwater side. But there's a lot of questions to ask when you collect a sample. You need to understand if you have lead pipes or copper pipes with lead solder. How old is that? Is it from 86 or before? Illinois was the last state to stop using lead, and that would have been in 1986. Most states stopped well before that, and lead solder was still a thing until 2014. So if you have copper pipes with lead connections, lead solder connections, then that still could be an issue. And what devices do you have? That all matters whenever someone's looking at a water sample to see. You can just look at what all the contaminants are, but to understand how the chemistry might be different can matter. And so a good lab will actually give you all that information, good instructions on how to collect a sample and where you should collect it, what you should do afterward, if it needs to be iced, how fast it needs to be shipped, bacteria, it's 2 days or 48 hours, some of those sorts of things. And you should also ask the lab any questions you have, and if they can answer them, I usually suggest you find a different lab. Again, I just think I just said all this. So the chemistry can be very different. So we try to collect 2 samples, and I'm going to give you an example of that. This is a lab sample from 2015, where I believe this is the outside spigot. So it's before any kind of treatment. And the things to note here is the pH on the right side is 8.02. Further below that, the alkalinity and hardness are in the 300s. There's a fair amount of turbidity and color. And then there's things like the sodium on the left side near the top is 25.9, and the iron's pretty high at 2.99. And just a smattering of things here that are in this natural groundwater. After their 5-micron filter and a water softener, you can see how all that's changed. The sodium went to 198 from 25.9. So what's happened there is they're using a typical sodium salt water softener, and that's replacing those ions. And so now there's a lot more sodium in your water, and that could be an unintended consequence for someone who may be on a low sodium diet. I still think you'd have to have drink a lot of water for it to be an issue, but it's something you should discuss with your doctor, right? Other things, the iron and magnesium and those things have went down to 2 orders of magnitude at least. The turbidity and color have changed. The hardness went from 350 something down to 0.68 on the bottom left, or bottom right, sorry. And so it's doing its job, right? It's taking out some of the things that are in the water, it's softening all those things it's supposed to. This person also added an RO unit before they took the sample, and so they took a sample that's actually at their kitchen tap, which would be after the filtration, the softener, and the RO, reverse osmosis unit. And you can see there's a lot more of those less than arrows, which represent, the first one, iron, less than 0.024 means our lab equipment has a detection limit of 0.024, and it was below that. So it's not saying it's technically 0, but it's lower than we can detect. The one unintended consequence here is the pH. You've taken all the minerals and other things out of the water, and that takes out some of the buffering that keeps the pH high. And now the pH is 6.23, which means it's a little acidic, which could make it more corrosive. Again, that would be an issue for, if it's right at your kitchen tap, it's not really an issue. But we have seen folks who had whole house RO units, which in my opinion is a real waste of money, unless you have a specific issue that really warranted it, which I haven't run across any of those yet. But by having a lower pH, now you're, if you had the RO unit before it went through all your house plumbing, it could cause a little more corrosion or leaching of lead or copper or whatever it might be. So again, your water sample, where you collect it in your, from your well to your kitchen tap matters. And, most of the time, obviously our advice would be you want to collect a sample that's from the tap where you get your drinking water, where you fill up your coffee, where you get your water for cooking, or whether you're filling up pitchers of tea or whatever it might be. That's where you should test. And that way you're ensuring what you're actually ingesting is of a certain quality. Okay, so what to test for? It's really a little different in every situation. There's a number of organizations now, including us, that have a list of things that would be common for anyone in the country, but you also need to understand what's going on in your local area. I mentioned earlier that in Illinois, we have a few aquifers where there's arsenic. There are states where there is no arsenic. When you talk to a state agency that regulates community water supplies, they'll say, we don't have anyone treating for arsenic in our state. 1,000 communities across the state, it's just not there. So you might not need to test for arsenic in some areas. Others may have some other contaminant or natural occurring contaminant that's not that common for the rest of the country. The only way to know is to ask questions. So ask your state or local health department. I'd also ask your state resource agency, like in Illinois, that would be your state water survey or state geological survey. In Michigan, it would be EGLE, which I can't remember what the acronym stands for. It used to be their DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality. In Minnesota, it's Department of Health. In New York's Department of Health. It just varies by state. But if you just Google state water quality agency, And then you can identify, they can help you. There's a lot of sampling that's been going on around the country for many years. And at the state level, a lot of states have that data and have mapped water quality in certain ways. And it just depends which states have more resources and all that stuff. I do want to mention at the bottom here, sample for coliform bacteria and nitrate annually. They indicate a pathway into your well. I'm going to address that in the questions because there were a number of questions about it. But just testing for coliform and nitrate does not mean your well's safe or your waters doesn't have anything else in it. You test for coliform and nitrate because they exist they're so common in the near surface environment. And if you find them, either any coliform bacteria or elevated nitrate, it likely means that there's a pathway into your well from a shallow source. And that just means you're more at risk. And it means there's potential for other things that might be in the near surface environment to get into your well, whether that be pesticides or other types of bacteria or viruses or whatever it might be. So we test for those annually because it indicates that your well is still secure, if you will, safe, doesn't have a breach near the surface, some of those things. But it doesn't mean, you could still have other things like arsenic or other common natural occurring contaminants. So as an example, this is Rhode Island. This is on Rhode Island Department of Health's website. All the little dots are where there were orchards that for many years until the 60s or so used arsenic as the pesticide of choice for all of their trees. It's contaminated the soil in those areas, and some of that is leached into the shallow groundwater. And so they've identified all of those areas as someplace that you need to test for arsenic because it's likely got into the groundwater system there. And the big splotch in the middle, the third of the state that has that darker area, that's where there's naturally occurring beryllium. And this is kind of my poster child for why you need to ask. I'd never heard of beryllium being a contaminant. I didn't realize that under the Safe Drinking Water Act, which regulates community water supplies, you have to test for beryllium because it does have health effects. And so if I'm a homeowner and on a well in this area, you need to test for beryllium. And that's not something I would recommend to anyone else in the country because it's just not common that I know of. And so, again, this is why you ask. You contact your state or look at your state website, resource agency, and here it's Department of Health, and you identify anything else that you might want to sample for. Because all the standard tests may not cover everything for your specific situation. Another example in Massachusetts, the state DEP's put up this website. There's a lot of arsenic and uranium in the bedrock aquifers here. So they've developed this tool. They've mapped all that, but they've developed this tool where you can just type in your address and it will tell you whether there's likely arsenic or uranium in the bedrock aquifers there. And that can inform you on whether you need to test for those things. Especially uranium is not a common thing that you would test for. It's separate from most standard testing. And so, but it's certainly something you want to know if it happened. And then lastly, I just pulled this down from Wisconsin's website last night, actually, because this page continually updates and they improve it. In Wisconsin, both private wells and community water supplies are all regulated through their Department of Natural Resources. And so they sample a lot of private wells. And you can go onto this page and you can tell it you want to look at county, township, or section. You can then pick a parameter. I picked arsenic. And the health standard for a community water supply is 10 parts per billion, or micrograms per liter. So anything over 10 is considered unsafe. And a community water supply would have to treat to lower the amount of arsenic that they're delivering to their customers below 10. So there is no regulation for private wells in Wisconsin or anywhere really on what your levels have to be as a continuing water quality parameter, if you will. And so most of the private well industry and professionals and those that work in public health use the standards for community water supplies as a guide on what would be safe for a private well. And so for arsenic here, you can see there's one red county, it's Winnebago County, that's the one I've highlighted. They've had 1,700 samples collected in that county from private wells. 588 were not detected, there was no detection, but 151 had over 100, or I'm sorry, 32 had over 151 parts per billion, which the maximum value was 15,000, which that has acute health effects at that level. It's dangerous, right? You know, at 250 or even, yeah, at 150 or 200 parts per billion, it still has health effects, obviously, for if you drink it, but it doesn't have any dermal effects. You can still take a shower in it, all those things. It's much higher where it becomes any other kind of risk, or ingesting it would be an acute risk. And so in Wisconsin, they have an aquifer that's known to be very high in arsenic, and they've actually legislatively made it illegal to use that aquifer. So if it's a bedrock aquifer, and if you're going to drill a well, you can go past it to a deeper aquifer, but you have to case off through that aquifer, so there's no way water can get in to the well from that unit that has all the arsenic. So it's just really interesting, but you can see, you know, if I was going to move to Green Bay and buy a home with a private well, I'd obviously, using this, I could look through and see what issues there might be, and then I could be sure that I test for those things or talk to the homeowner who owns the property and see what kind of treatment they already have in place. The thing is, people get scared away from a home with a well. There's really no reason for that. Most things can be treated for using conventional kinds of treatment, like RO for arsenic, and you know, the water you're still drinking is perfectly safe. So, but this is an amazing tool. I wish every state had one and had the resources to actually collect all the samples they've collected. There's a lot of great information here to help understand. Then if you add that to, you know, the types of aquifers they have in those areas, whether they're sand and gravel or bedrock, some of those things, you can really learn a lot about what the water quality is going to be if you're going to drill your own well. So here's what we suggest annually for coliform and nitrate. And Brian Swistock was at Penn State Extension. He's retired now, but he's, I mean, literally the most knowledgeable person I've ever met on private well issues. He suggests 14 months. And I think that's because, especially with shallow wells, you can have seasonal effects, or, you know, there's, you know, much more infiltration in the spring. If you're in a northern climate where it's frozen in the winter, you don't have very much until the spring. And so by doing it every 14 months, over time, over the course of 5 years, or 6 years, I'm sorry, now you've sampled all throughout the year, basically, and gives you an idea if there's any differences and things like that. But again, coliform and nitrate testing are to identify a potential well problem. They don't mean that your well doesn't have any other water quality issues. And so we recommend this list basically, and some things like zinc and cadmium if you have galvanized piping. I know we had a question from someone who just replaced their piping with galvanized, and they're having a real lot of zinc as that seasons, if you will. And so these are just common things that give you an idea of your water quality. Once you've taken these, once you've had a sample collected, you know, you should take it to your local or state health department and get advice on what it means. I'm going to show you a tool that's available online that can give you an initial answer, but then again, in the end, I would take it to someone who's qualified to evaluate that. So when should you test? Well, once, we recommend once every 3 to 5 years, but also anytime that you've opened the well, or if you've disinfected the well because it had bacteria, you always should collect a follow-up sample to make sure that the water is now safe. Sometimes it may take 2 or 3 times to disinfect a well, or an emergency response event like a flood, or this is from a fire. You can see this well cap laying beside the well is all melted. It was aluminum. So a forest fire came through and melted this well cap off, melted all the wiring together. and this is in Colorado, but it's, there's a lot of issues related to this, that whatever that aluminum any of that may have dripped down in the well, or some of the coating on the wires dripped down into the well. There's no getting that out per se. And so you need to pump that a lot and then test it and make sure there's nothing that's now part of your well that would make it unsafe to drink. As far as getting it analyzed, every state accredits labs because communities have to test every 3 months as part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so we recommend you try to use one on those lists. And again, some states have programs for private well sampling. One of the best is Iowa. They have their state legislature provides money to their counties annually. It's called the Grants to Counties program. And with that, the county health departments can offer subsidized or free testing. They can offer other services to replace or add treatment, I believe. Also for old wells that need to be abandoned, they can cost share those things. So there's most states don't have a Grants to Counties program. I wish they did, but Iowa's a great example of that, and you should check. Another example is New Mexico. They don't have a program per se, but they're on their wastewater side, their state agency, if you'll give them the information, they want to start a record of where all the septic systems are in the state and decentralized wastewater systems. And if you'll provide them with those details, they will give you a free water sample. And so, there's other things like that. When you go to a lab, make sure they can give you the right instructions, that they explain everything so that you're satisfied. And if they can't answer your questions, like I said before, they should be able to. And if they don't know enough about private wells to answer your questions, then I would find another lab. And that's just my take on it. And today, there are even other types of, one example, there's a company that they serve as a middleman. They actually have contracts with labs all over the country. You can go to their website, sign up. They'll send you a kit in the mail with instructions. You fill up your bottles, you put it back in the box. It's got a label. It ships to a lab near you, and it's a very simple process in that respect. And so some of those things are available too. I just check them out and make sure you understand what they're offering, that they use accredited labs, that they have good ratings, all those sorts of things if you're going to use one. Okay, as far as finding a lab, I Googled EPA certified labs, and the first thing that comes up is certification of laboratories that analyze drinking water on EPA's website. When you go there, they're certified. Yeah, you get to this page, and if you scroll down the page, you see a map that's clickable, or you can do the drop-down menu, and it takes you to the state website for the state agency that regulates community water supplies. And they have lists of all the labs that are certified in their state. Many of those are not in that particular state. Nowadays with overnight shipping, we just shipped some samples from Illinois to Phoenix, Arizona this morning, and it'll be there by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. So that's the world we live in today. But my point is, you can find a lab that may be physically near you that way. You can also Google other ways, but this way you're getting someone who's went through the trouble of being certified so they can do drinking water samples for community water supplies. And in some cases, some of those labs only do community water supplies, but most of the time they also do other sorts of samples. As far as interpreting your results, as I mentioned before, you can look up your results on a website, or there's documents maybe even from your state agency that, one thing I will say is that, so like I mentioned earlier, the arsenic standard is 10 parts per billion. That's the national standard through the Safe Drinking Water Act, is issued by US EPA. And so every community water supply has to meet that. But a state itself can also, on their own, could make a more strict rule. They can't make it less strict. So no state could say, we're going to make it 20 instead of 10, but states can make it 5 instead of 10, and a few states have. And so that's not necessarily an issue, for a private well owner, but it may be that the folks that you go talk to about your results would consider that lower level safe. And so there's a little ambiguity there in some cases. Sometimes if you find something in your well and when you talk to a professional and it doesn't seem like it really should have been there, and there's no rhyme or reason, you might want to resample just for that to confirm. And if you did a bacteria test and it was for coliform, then you need to test for E. coli if you haven't. You don't always find E. coli where there's coliform, but you do in many cases. And so regardless, until you've mitigated that problem by either chlorinating your well or whatever you need to do to get rid of the bacteria that's in your system, you need to boil your water and use that for cooking, drinking, all those sorts of things until you have a clean test. So one of those tools is called the Be Well Informed Guide. So this was developed by the state of New Hampshire with funding from CDC. So, it meets the credibility test right there. It's a state agency trying to help their citizens, if you will. And so they've got this tool, and I'll show you, it's actually, it was so popular and so well done that now a number of other states are using the code for the same thing. But you click on the green box and you just look up Be Well Informed Guide, and this will pop up, or I'll show you at the end here another page that might pop up that works basically the same way. So you click on Enter My Test Results, and then you can enter them. It asks you for what New Hampshire town or city you're in at the top right. You can always say anonymous. They're not trying to force people to do things. And so even though you're not in New Hampshire, you can still use this. You type in your results and it asks you units, which different labs may provide your results in different units. It's actually a very confusing thing. To me, this is the one huge advantage to using this service. And it's free when I say service, because if they happen to give you results in milligrams per liter, it would be 0.015, the arsenic would be. But in micrograms per liter, the standard's 10 or 0.01 milligrams per liter, it'd be 15. So I purposely put in a value that's higher than the MCL, which are what the limits are called for community water supplies, maximum contaminant level allowed by law. But you can see you've got all these different units to choose from, so you can match them to what's on your sample results that you get from the lab. And I say this is, I know I'm stressing on this a little bit, but we have a question on our pretest, which when you sign up for the private well class, the first things it sends you is a link to a pretest. We ask you, I think there's 11 or 12 questions, and one of them is basically to convert from one of these units to another. Only 27% of all the people that have taken our class and filled out the pretest, which is over 10,000 people, got that question right. So it's a real issue. And if you put the wrong numbers in based on the units that don't match up, you're going to be 1,000 times off. And that could really lead to a scary moment or some other issue. Or you may think it's safe and it really isn't. And so it's important to make sure you have your units correct. So my 15 gives me a red X, and it says 15 micrograms per liter, which is 0.015 milligrams per liter, is above the standard of 0.01 milligrams per liter. The other advantage of this system is that they then tell you what kinds of treatment remove arsenic. So, if someone says you can use a cloth filter, they are wrong, right? It does not remove arsenic. You need a point of use, either absorptive media, like granular activated carbon might be one choice, or point of use RO. And so there's all this information at the bottom about how to find a qualified professional, what you need to understand about third-party certifiers of treatment equipment. It's a whole thing. And we explain all of that in the last lesson of our private well class on what the certifiers look like. There's three main ones: Underwriters Lab, like the UL you used to see on light bulbs, NSF, which is National Sanitation Foundation. They also certify treatment equipment. And the third is the Water Quality Association. They have a gold seal. They have a whole testing unit that does the same thing. They bring in a device. It's supposed to remove arsenic. They test it against a set of criteria that a bunch of experts have put together as a committee through ANSI NSF. And then they test it and ensure that it actually removes what it's supposed to. My point here is if you add treatment, make sure any device you buy has been certified by one of those third-party certifiers. And if you get to that point and you have questions or need more information, we'd always be glad to help. Either call us directly or email us, or the help center I'm going to mention in a minute. You can contact us through that. Okay. And yeah, as you go down further, it gives you what the health concerns are, a lot of good information. And it's asking down at the bottom there, why, there's no value listed for chloride, copper, blah, 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 because I just threw one value in, but you would enter all your results. And sometimes there's interactions there that matter. And it's probably a better way to fill that out. So I mentioned the Be Well Informed tool was from New Hampshire. We had them speak at our private well conference, the first one we held in 2017. And there were a number of other states there. And at least 3 or 4 states at the time asked for the code on this tool. And so now ECOS, the Environmental Council of the States, manages this website. But all of the states listed here, as well as Wake County, North Carolina, which is a wealthy county near Raleigh, or it includes Raleigh, have added their version onto this. And when I say version, it doesn't mean that the code has changed or the rules have changed, but there's a place in here where they offer resources to someone who has a certain kind of problem. If the state has, a manual on treatment for arsenic, or a best practices guide for the types of equipment you should use for some kind of constituent, those are state specific. And so now each of these states have added material that meets their regs and rules and tells the homeowner, the well owner, the advice they would give in their state. And so you can go to a state specific version. The ideal here would be that all 50 states are represented. ECOS has been very generous with the way they run this system, but the state still has to put up time and effort and resources to get onto the system, and some just don't have that wherewithal, or in some cases I'm sure it's just they don't see that adding their information, if they don't have anything specific, you could just use somebody else's, and I would use New Hampshire's for us. So again, these tools are only a guide. You should always take your sample results to your health department to get a qualified answer. And if they don't know, they're going to know, because that's going to happen too. Some, especially local health districts or county health departments, they're focused on a lot of things to protect our health, food, and everything under the sun that has a health component. They may not have someone who is a water expert, but they'll know who to go talk to at the state level or somewhere else. And so they want to help you. They want to ensure your water's safe. And when I say they, I've had this slide in here a long time. They cannot tell you to stop drinking your water or condemn your well. They can only recommend it. And that's not totally true today. I ran across a local health district in Connecticut at a meeting where the person who runs their private well program said that they do have the authority to condemn a well. It was really surprising to me. It's the first time I'd heard that. And now Rhode Island has changed. So there's either 4 or 5 states, I think it's 5, that require testing when a property is sold with a well. And Rhode Island, the other 4, you have to share the results with the buyer and the seller. They can decide what they're going to do about it, but they both have to be informed. And it also provides the state with a lot of great data. But Rhode Island went a step further, and they've tied that to their building inspector program. And they've written their law in a way that basically says if you have a contaminant that's over an MCL, you have to remediate it. So you have to add treatment or do whatever, whether it's put in a new well or figure out what's going on, so that that's not going to be an issue in the future, or they have the authority to condemn the property as unlivable, as like a building inspector would condemn a property. I don't know if that's ever actually been used. I haven't talked to Rhode Island in a while, but it is the law there. So especially when selling a property, some of those things could become an issue. So the other part of all this is poor construction. And honestly, the two things we see most are well owners who really don't know how to take care of their well, and they're not doing the things they should, like they have a Folgers can on top of their well over the pipe instead of having a sealed well cap. Or they have a well that doesn't meet code, has been in the ground for 60 years. You know, the rules have changed a lot since then, and so it wouldn't meet, and it isn't necessarily protecting the water from inside the well from near surface influences. And so as far as well construction code goes, you know, they have changed a lot in the past 30 or so years. I know our well code in Illinois has been updated, you know, dozens of times. Most of them are minor changes, but over time those all add up. We still, existing wells have always been grandfathered in. So for instance, I grew up on a well that was hand dug in 1933. It was brick lined. It's had frogs in it. It gets cloudy when it rains. The water does, dirty looking, completely unsafe. But my dad grew up on that well as well. It was on a farm and he always swore by it. And so that's what we drank. But that well definitely was contaminated the entire time I lived there. And these old hand dug wells, there are so many of them are still in use. And so the other thing is a well in a pit. In a northern climate where there's a frost line in the winter, you know, whether that's at a foot or 3 foot, wells were put in pits so they could be below that frost line. Those are bad because heavy rainstorm, the pit could fill up with water. And again, if the well isn't completely sealed, which is rare that it would be, then surface water is going to run into the well. So we still see wells in pits. We did an inventory of wells. This has been now, it's a little dated. I think in 2011, I hired 5 students to go out and identify every well in 9 townships in rural Illinois in this one area. And they found 1,706 wells. And I think, boy, over 100 were dug wells, and we found about 30 that were still in pits. And so it's just the way it's always been. So that's what they still do. They're a risk. Not only are they a risk for surface contamination, but they're also a safety hazard. And I show you this as 2 examples. The picture on the left is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. They are the agency in Washington State that regulates drilling and wells. And so they have a blog. This is dated too. It's probably 12 or 13 years old, but there's an old piece of plywood over the well. It's an old hand dug well with corrugated pipe as the casing. You can see the funnel sitting there, probably to put oil in the pump. All that gray stuff on the ground is likely old insulation that either mice have chewed or just has rotted and fell. She stepped on the plywood, fell in and killed her. But this is a completely unsafe well. You know, there's a lot of things that can fall in here, and then that's their water supply. So just a really poor situation. And Don Kelderman was in Southern Illinois. We ran into each other when I was down there working with some irrigators. He found this well that someone had taken a concrete pipe, a culvert, and put vertically in the well, but it only stuck up about a foot, and it wasn't covered. And when he looked down in it, he could see the old stones down at the bottom. That's the old stone part of the well. A goat had fallen in, and looks like a long time ago, and fell in there. And you know, this was a well that wasn't in use, but we certainly see many of these old wells where we've had people call us and say, hey, there's frogs in our well, or snakes, or you know, a bunch of mice had fallen in and died and they're floating, and people in some cases are still drinking that water. It's totally unsafe. It's likely got bacteria and maybe more than just E. coli. This is just a situation that shouldn't exist. So what do you do with these? You need to, if it's a well in a pit, you extend the pipe up to the surface. And I realize all this costs money. Yeah, there's got to be, you need to think about what it means to have these things. If it's a pit again, you can install a pitless adapter and then fill that in with clay. So it's really, talk to your well authority in the area, county, or a drilling contractor and find out what they recommend. Get more than one estimate, all those things. And in some cases, there may be a program. I know we've done webinars on funding and financing. The bottom line is there's not a lot of funding or financing available unless you're well below the poverty level. Right now, it's set at 60% of the local poverty level for funding from USDA to either fix a well or septic or add treatment or any of those things. Hopefully that'll get changed in the next version of the Farm Bill that will be passed, I think, either later this year or next year. But there are, you need to be inquisitive. And we did a webinar last year on funding and financing, and we had the USDA folks on, and we brought up a bunch of examples of other programs. You just need to look around, and there may be some source. So, but yeah, you're responsible for your well. So sometimes that's going to cost money. As far as abandoned wells, same thing. Someone buys a farmstead with 5 acres, they tear down the old house, and they put up a new one, they put in a new well, and the old well, we'll just keep it. We're going to use it for the garden. And then it ends up being neglected. The lid's not on their well, or it doesn't have a lid at all. And so we know that there's many, many, many of these. Well logs weren't required in most states until at least the 60s, and some the 80s or later. New York didn't require it until 2000. Illinois, it's 1968. So it just depends how many records they have on file, but we're pretty sure there's more undocumented wells out there than we actually have on file. And so we have about 460,000 well logs. Only about 300,000 of those we think are active wells, but in the state, there's probably closer to 750 to 800,000 active private wells in use. And so we don't have records for over half of them. And we started earlier than most states in the game, so to speak. Like wells and pits, they're a safety hazard. If you have an old well on your property, and the best thing to do is abandon it properly. You fill it in, following the rules in your state if they have them. We do in Illinois. Some states don't. But it leaves you responsible. Someone can walk on your property totally trespassing, fall in, either get hurt or killed, and you'd be responsible for that. Or if someone dumps something in those, and we see that too, sometimes you look down in these wells, these old abandoned wells, and there's several big, barrels or canisters where they, it's just amazing how, yeah, I'm not even sure what to say about that. But if it gets contaminated, it might contaminate the whole aquifer, or at least a plume may move towards your neighbor's home, and all of a sudden they're getting sick. And so you just have to take care of these things. It's necessary. So for example, again, the 2 pictures here are both from the Washington State Department of Ecology's blog. One of them, they're pulling a horse out of an old well, and the one on the bottom, Sheldon man falls 45 feet into a well. They actually pulled him out and he walked away. Lucky. That doesn't happen all that often. These 4 newspaper clippings are all from the 90s. The third one is for those of you old enough to remember. Jessica McClure was a little girl who got in a well, and it took, I think it was 18 hours or 22 hours, something like that. Those are the numbers there. To get her out. It was covered live on CNN, on national TV. And she was singing while she was in there. She's too young to realize the situation she was in. But they did get her out. Now she's a mother of 3. But a lot of other people aren't so lucky. And this is, in the early 90s, before everything was on the internet and you could see what was happening all over the country. The folks in some parts of the state didn't realize that things were going on like this in other parts of the state. But people falling in wells is more common than you'd realize. And so, yeah, it's just a concern. So I want to talk a little bit about our private well class before we get to your questions. Again, it's a series of 10 lessons and self-paced. So you sign up on our website, you give us your email address, and we send you an email once a week with an attached PDF that's lesson 1 through 10. You're on your own to read it. No one's going to check up on you. There's nothing to check at the end, other than we do ask a pre-test, which is just you go to a website and you answer the questions that are all A, B, C, or D, and then you get another test at the end. And the idea there is if you take both legs of that, which we ask that you do, we can see how much you've learned. And if you got a better score on the second one than the first one, that helps us. We can show that to the folks that fund us, and and hopefully you've actually learned something by going through the class. It's been very well received. We've had over 12,000 people take it so far, and yeah. And so then we do webinars like today, and that's really a chance to ask questions, as well as going through some of the issues related to some of the most common things that get asked or whatever. And there's a lot more information on our website, and I'm going to go through some of that now, as well as some additional programs that we've developed over the years as our program's grown. So this is our front page. You click on Take Our Free Class, the second green box at the top there, or in the middle, and or you can visit our help center, which I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we list webinars that we've done. We have a podcast. I'll show you that in a second. We've expanded our program so that we're trying to provide more relevant information for those who are interested, as well as the core information you need as a well owner. So for each of the 10 lessons, the first lesson is called The Science of Groundwater. The second one's Groundwater Well Contamination. We list a bunch of free publicly available resources from other sources that we use to help write that lesson, or have additional information that we think are relevant for that particular topic. Each of the lessons that we put together are 6 to 10 pages long. And so the entire thing is, I think it's 86 pages for all 10 lessons. I might have that wrong, but I think that's right. And so there's a lot of good information here. We encourage everyone to not only go through the lesson we provide, like The Science of Groundwater, but go through some of these others. Like the Lyle Raymond documents are both, they're almost 40 years old, but they're really good, very basic and very well written to make it easy to understand some of the concepts that are there. And that's the idea, right? Is that you understand what an aquifer is or what artesian is, all those sorts of things that matter. So you understand how water is getting in your well, how it can get contaminated from somewhere else or on site, all the best practices, common problems, what to do with treatment, why you should sample. I mean, it covers step by step how to get through. It's kind of a well owner 101. The whole lesson is. We also do webinars like today, as I mentioned. We've done a few like this one on outreach strategies that are geared more for professionals. We had some funding a little over 10 years ago from CDC to look at why people don't test. And what came out of that was we interviewed a lot of programs around the country that were either local, county, or state that were doing efforts to get well owners to test, and found out what worked, what didn't, why, what problems they had, what they do differently. And so we provided all of that in a webinar that was, again, really for anyone who has a health program or a well, education or outreach program. And so those are all available on YouTube. I know our YouTube channel has had over 2 million views of the videos that are there since we started, which is really awesome. I mentioned the funding and financing option for well owners. I try to highlight that. We've done that twice, but the last one was in February of 23. Nothing's changed really. There just isn't a lot of, quote, free money out there to help private well owners. But there are some programs or cost share programs, I know, and we go through some of those. And this isn't just about putting in a new well. In some cases, it might be about septic or about cost sharing for abandoned wells, or cost sharing or free sampling that goes on. Like I mentioned, the Grants to Counties program provides resources for getting water samples tested. And so again, all these are on our website under webinars, and they're also under past webinars. When you scroll over that, there's a drop down, also on our YouTube channel. And then a couple specific ones. This one was just about lead, and we haven't repeated this since 2018, but it doesn't need to be. If there was a lot of new information or a lot of changes, we certainly would. We had Dr. Kelsey Piper from Northeastern University, who's done a ton of research working, sampling in homes with lead in Virginia and North Carolina, where they have fairly corrosive groundwater. And so they have a lot of issues with lead pipes, copper pipes with lead solder, and galvanized pipes. And so it's really explains what you need to know. You know, lead is not a issue because of groundwater. You don't find lead naturally in groundwater except in a few places where there's a lot of it in the ground. It's a premise plumbing problem. It's the plumbing in your home. So it doesn't matter if you're on a community water supply or on a private well. If you have an older home that has lead or lead solder or galvanized pipes, you need to understand whether or not you might have a leaching problem, leaching lead problem. And it really depends on the water chemistry, right? It's not you can have lead pipes and have no lead in your drinking water. It's not an automatic that it leaches out of the pipes, but you know, you don't know if you don't test and understand what your water quality is. So we also created a page with some resources, you know, those pitcher filters and granular activated carbon tap filters that go on your kitchen tap work really well at removing lead. And so we've links to some of that stuff. And if you just go to our webpage, is privatewellclass.org. If you just add /lead, it'll take you to this page and some resources there. We also created a bunch of videos on specific topics, like what should I know about a shared well? So if you're on you have a well that you share with one or more other homes, we've ran into a lot of issues where a pump fails and then there's no legal agreement. And you know, now all of a sudden neighbors are not neighbors anymore. They're certainly not friendly. And so we go through some of the issues we've seen and what you really need to put in place. There's a lot more shared wells than I realized around the country when we started this program. And it's really crazy how many times either a developer or, you know, a family that built 2 or 3 homes when they were all living in a certain spot, and now that's different owners that have some of these problems. And this is just another example. Why does my well keep losing pressure? We have a very similar one that's how does my pressure tank work? And you know, now with the tankless pressure, as well as tankless water heaters and all those things they've come up with, some of these are becoming obsolete a little bit. But we've figured out that well owners typically have pressure problems because by far this video and that other video on how my pressure tank works are the most watched we have. This one's had over 400,000 views since 2016. The other one has had over 500,000 views. And so you can find those again on our YouTube channel, which is just listed there. And you can also get to it from our webpage. We have a YouTube link up in the corner. We started a podcast a number of years ago. We've put out 48 episodes as 4 seasons so far. And I just highlighted a few that are private well related. It's called Tap Talk, the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. There's Brian Swistock I mentioned earlier. I'm glad we had a chance to interview him before he retired. But these are all folks who are experts in their field or are dealing with an issue that's much broader than just their own local jurisdiction in most cases. And so we've had a lot of good guests on. I like to say, check it out. It's called the Drinking Water Podcast. It's meant to be about drinking water in rural America, not just private wells. So some of the folks we've had on are on the public water side, community water supplies, and issues that are related to those systems, especially small rural systems that don't have as much wherewithal or have trouble staying in compliance and some of those things. The class is available in Spanish. being at a, what I'll call a world-class research university like the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. We had access to a PhD student from Columbia who was on a Fulbright scholarship and was actually frustrated with how translators, the automatic translators of documents and things like that work. And so we offered him a job translating the private well class, and he did a great job. He was really into it, translated all the figures and everything else as well. This was a number of years ago. Now he's a successful engineer in Canada. But yeah, so we're very fortunate to have this information available in Spanish. If you know of any families that are primary Spanish speakers or work in an area where there's a lot of folks who native Spanish speakers may live, you can share this with them, and you can get to this from the bottom of our other webpage. So we launched April 1, a private well hotline. This was part of our grant from US EPA. They wanted us to do this or asked us to do this as part of our grant. And so it's not just a phone number, it's also a knowledge base and on a website and a chat feature that uses the information we've developed over the years to create answers with an AI. So like we fed all of the transcripts from all the webinars we've ever done into this AI, and so that it can provide consistent answers with the message we provide every month, right? So I mentioned Sally earlier. Sally is managing the system. She's taking the calls and working with folks online through the chat. When she's available, then she answers or works with folks, and not necessarily the AI. But we've added this to our webpage, and so it says visit the help center. It's also available on US EPA's website, which has created a lot of traction, if you will. We're starting to get a little more busy. But when you go to that page, you can either ask a question through the chat, you can search the knowledge base by start typing in, like if you say chlorination or shock chlorination, it's going to come up with the articles that we have in here that are related to those topics, or you can call us at the number above. And Sally, do you have any information today on, we just put this up. We launched it April 1, but it didn't go on EPA's webpage until middle of May. I don't know, what's our stats look like so far?
So with the knowledge base, we've had over 3,000 people visit the Help Center already, and there are currently 145 articles that can be viewed. And of those 3,000 people, they've looked at the articles over 4,000 times. So I feel really good traction for just having it for the first couple months.
Oh,
And
no
then
doubt.
for the actual phone number for the hotline, since it's on the EPA's website, we've helped over 40 people from 21 states who are experiencing unique problems with their wells. So we hope these numbers continue to grow, and hope that everybody's willing to spread the word for us.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it is helpful. And she talks, we've only had 40 phone calls so far, but it's only been up less than a month. And they've been very complicated situations. Many times, there's one going on right now where I had to contact some folks that we know at another agency because we don't have that expertise. And so it's actually pretty cool that we can dig down in and provide answers to folks who need some help. So overall, I'd say this is the message. Our goal is to help well owners understand why their well is important, why they need to understand how it works, and all that leads to how they can protect themselves from risk for water quality issues. And so many of the questions I want to mention that, there were 80 or 90 questions provided for today, and many of those are answered in our 10 lesson class in one way or another, and not all of them for sure. But going through our class, the 10 lesson class, will give you a very good basic knowledge of what to do with your well and what concerns you should have, how it works, how to read your well log, all those things. And what that leads to is, the next time you come on one of our webinars, you may have a specific question, but you're going to ask it in a way that makes it clear you know what you're talking about. And that's the same for when you're working with one of the local professionals in your area. They know when someone really is clueless about their well and when someone has some wherewithal. And like anything else, you treat people differently when they can talk the talk, or they understand why this is a situation versus someone who's really clueless and they just want you to get it done. And so it's important, and because you should understand all the basic issues related to having a private well for your drinking water supply. We did receive a lot of questions. Katie is also taking questions. I meant to mention that earlier in the question or chat box on your GoToWebinar window. So if you have a question based on anything I've said so far, you can type it in there. She's monitoring that. She's adding it to a document that I'll pull up on the screen at the end. And we'll either answer those questions or ask you to email us. If I can't answer it, I'll find someone who can, in most cases, and we'll get back to you with an answer. I'd like to say we know everything there is to know about private wells, but the truth is every month when we get questions, I learn there's something I don't know, or many things I don't know, and which is a good thing. Because then we can research that and talk to someone who does have that expertise, and it helps us too. So we're always learning is the bottom line here. I do want to mention too that, like today, this is recorded. So as we go through the questions you see pop up on the screen, last month's webinar also had questions, and the month before that, and the month before that. It's really worth it even to go back to the webinars with the same title, to just go through the video to the point where we start going through questions and look at different questions that might have been asked. I do try to answer different questions each month because it's, you can go back and find the other ones. And then now a lot of those are on our knowledge base in our help center too. But some will be different. And so it's really worth it to go through and look at those. And so I just want to make sure and mention that the second half, a lot of those videos are just answering questions, and we've had some doozy questions. I can't even, that are totally off the wall, if you will, not common. And, we usually can find an answer or straighten the situation out. So first question, are the $30, $40 home testing kits with strips available on Amazon typically reliable? So, we haven't tested this for a while, but we have in the past, and many of these kits are not. They might be a qualitative test, where you're looking at a color. It depends on a lot of things, how long it's been sitting on the shelf. We've seen them from being just qualitative at best to, in some cases, completely unreliable. It really isn't worth using those cheap tests. If you want to know what your pH is, maybe, things you'd use for your pool, those Sina tests, those are a little better just because the pool industry is so big and they've had to develop those for homeowners. But you shouldn't use Amazon in-home tests for looking at your arsenic level or anything that might be a risk. It's really worth getting the testing done by an accredited lab. It's going to be $200 to do a generalized test or more, but it's worth it. It's not like you're doing it that often, and it's investing in the future of your family, really. Anyway, yeah, enough said. Is water safe to drink if it tested positive for coliform? Well, so again, I know I've mentioned this a couple times. Coliform testing and then arsenic or nitrate as well, they're meant to be indicators of a pathway into your well. So though coliform itself is not a health risk, by having it in your well, it means there could be other things in there that are E. coli, Pseudomonas, you name it, other kinds of bacteria, or other things. So the questions really should be, did you also test for E. coli? Or, do you have a sanitary well cap, or do you have a Folgers can on top of your well? Because those things, or did you disinfect your well after getting your results, or are you just drinking it? And the last one here, was the coliform result quantified? So they'll tell you colony forming units if in some kinds of tests, others are just a positive or a negative. And by knowing the CFUs, it kind of gives you an idea if it's a real issue or not. Sometimes you'll get a result back that might be 2. And that could have been just a problem with how the sample was collected. But if it comes back and it's 200 or, you know, even higher, then there's definitely coliform in the water. And so those really are the questions you should be asking. I think purposely drinking water with coliform, unless you've eliminated any other issue and you're sure your well is properly sealed, you're asking for, you know, trouble, and you won't know when. Who knows? I mean, if there's a pathway into your well, whatever happens at the surface could end up getting in and causing a problem. Yeah. How long should a homeowner wait to retest a well after chlorinating one due to high E. coli on test results? So, you know, the final step when you disinfect your well, if you follow the procedure we recommend, is to flush all the lines so there's no more chlorine. And, you know, so every tap that you've had chlorine sitting in overnight, or chlorinated water, then you flush it all out until there's, you don't smell it anymore and it's gone. So, I mean, there is no set time that I know of. And I didn't ask anyone else about this, but just on my experience, I would at least wait till the next day after you've used the water for a day. And when I say use the water, I mean for showers, for dishwashing, those things, not for drinking. But anytime after that would be a good time to test. Because if it's still there, you know, sometimes it can take several times to disinfect your well properly. And some of that may have to do with like biofilm buildup, where the chlorine is killing the surface layer of whatever's on the biofilm, but it can't get to the bottom layer. But the next time it gets a little deeper, and then, you know, eventually gets rid of it. So regardless of whether you wait 1 day or you decide to wait 3 to be sure that, you know, it's back in its natural state, you should cook and drink water that's been boiled until you've, or bottled water until you confirm that, you know, that sample result comes back and it's bacteria free. Determining hardness. This is interesting because a lot of people just, you know, they know hardness means you need a water softener, but how it's actually determined is it's a measure of calcium carbonate, if you will, and it's using calcium and magnesium as, and then calculating their role in that, so to speak. So the typical units are milligrams per liter, and it's this equation. Oh, I left off a pren. I guess I didn't finish this. So it's hardness in milligrams per liter. And so, you know, depending on what your calcium value is and your magnesium values are, you just plug those in milligrams per liter, multiply it out. You know, there are a number of websites that have little calculators on them, so you can just type in the calcium and magnesium values. And there's even, you know, lessons on determining hardness, so you can determine what you need to do for softening. Some trade schools, things like that, have those available. So if you want to learn more about hardness and some of those issues, I suggest trying to find one of those little online classes from, you know, some junior college where they go through this and a lot more on those topics. What are total dissolved solids? Mine were originally 2,510 parts per million. After installing an RO system, it's dropped to 67 parts per million. So TDS is a measure of anything that's dissolved in your water that isn't actually a water molecule. So, you know, we've already talked about some of the natural things we find in groundwater, but even, you know, iron, manganese, we have a lot of that in our Illinois groundwater, but it's anything that'll dissolve. It could be, you know, organic carbon, or it could be, you know, a chemical, everything, minerals, metals, all that, anything that's dissolved in the water all adds up to be a total dissolved solid value. So EPA suggests that TDS be under 500 ppm, but it really depends on what it actually is that's dissolved in the water. It could be lower than that and be a problem. It could be much higher than that and not be a problem. So as an example, our oceans, seawater, saltwater, could have a TDS of over 15,000 or 15 to 30,000, even higher than that, I think, which, most of that is sodium chloride that's dissolved in the water. I mean, salt water or seawater tastes salty. It's because it's got a lot of salt in it, and that's all dissolved. And so that makes the TDS value so high. And, we have saltwater aquifers that we do in Illinois and in other areas. So when you think about hearing how historically, when, back in the days or before dinosaurs, there were these inland oceans that are now land, all that stuff. Well, some of those are sandstone aquifers that are 2,000 feet below land surface, or some other type of bedrock that are saltwater. And we have in Southern Illinois, the bedrock, deep bedrock groundwater there has a TDS of, I believe, 11,000 maybe. And so you can't drink it. I mean, over 500, if it's saltwater, you can start to taste the salt. And we see places where a real saltwater aquifer may be upwelling a little bit into a freshwater aquifer. And in some cases, it's getting close to the 500. They say you can taste saltwater at 250 ppm, but there's an area not too far from here where we've tested, and several of the homes, they just use Culligan or some other service because their water tastes salty, and it's around 500. But it could be anything else too, right? That's just one example of what TDS can be. It's kind of a generic measure of all things that might be in your water. When it's really high like this 2510, I wonder if that might not be happening there. That it's kind of a saltwater situation, or could that be the most common reason that would happen? Yeah, so hopefully that explains that. Yeah, like I said, when it could be really high and it doesn't mean it's harmful. The bottom line is you need to test what it is by constituent to know what you have in your water. Tiny particles are showing up all over my house. Plumber says, and this is paraphrased, plumber says it's coming from the well, installed a filter, and in 3 weeks it's black. Planning to blow out the well. So I wasn't sure about how to answer this, just because what we see commonly with a filter, and this is the one I showed earlier, but on the left is a brand new 5 micron cloth filter, and on the right is a 6 to 8 week old version of that's being replaced. All of that black is iron and manganese. So if it was just iron, it'd be that rusty color you see, in the kitchen sink or in a bathtub somewhere. But the manganese makes it all turn black. And when you say particles showing up all over my house, I'm assuming you mean in all your fixtures. So what happens is those iron and the manganese and other minerals and metals and stuff are dissolved in the water, right? We just talked about that. When they hit air, so if they get oxidized, they form a particulate that comes out of it as iron oxide or manganese dioxide, and those are actual particles. And so if that's the particles that are showing up, blowing out your well isn't going to do anything. It's in the groundwater, it's dissolved in the water. It's going to continue to be a problem when the water comes up and hits air, because it's just going to react. That's what it does. If it's something else, then one question I'd have is, if it's not really that tiny, if they're really particles, you can get if you can collect enough of it, you can actually have it tested. And we had a well owner in Illinois who has so much iron that they were going through a filter like this every 3 or 4 days. So they installed this advanced system to remove iron, and it would get clogged up in a short amount of time as well. And it turned out when their original person put in the well, they did something to put air in the well to help. They said it would do something for the water. So they're basically causing that reaction to happen in the well and then pumping that into the house, and where it could continue to be a problem. But we sent, I mean, I was able to take handfuls of that material, and it was more red, like just iron. And I sent it to a lab in Nebraska, and they did an analysis of what all was in it, which it turned out to be almost all iron, because we were confused as why it would be so bad. But it turned out it was because they were adding air into their well, which makes no sense. But those things happen. So that's what I'd suggest. But if this looks like your filter, then I think you just have a bad iron or manganese problem. And that's common. And like I said, the person we helped here in Illinois, they had a severe amount of iron in their water, and it's just naturally there. It's just where their house happens to sit, and the water that's available directly under them. That's the bad side. Good side, would be if they had minerals or oil or something, but it's what Mother Nature gave them. And but you need to test and see, so if there might be something else going on. That's what I would do. What are my rights as a renter? Should my landlord pay for drinking water testing? So we actually had someone on our podcast who talked about this in New Hampshire, because they have the only law that we know of that has rules related to testing and the rights of renters in that case. So I would talk to your local or county health department and ask them what rights you might have, or if there are any rules. They're likely to know that. And they could have their own rules, especially if you're in a state like Massachusetts or Connecticut, where the health districts basically can make their own rules. It could be the case. But for Illinois, we don't have any of those rules. But my son rented a house out in the country in a rural area with an old dug well, and I was concerned. And so I went to the county health department and got a sampling kit and asked them about it. And they said, well, if it's unsafe, they would contact the owner. So we did have a sample. It did have coliform in it. And I went to my son, who at the time was maybe 22. He wouldn't let me do anything. He basically said, I'm fine. And he didn't want to do anything because he felt he knew the owner well enough that he would just end the lease or kick him out. And actually on that podcast I mentioned, they were basically forced to move when they started asking questions as a tenant, and the owner provided bottled water for a while, I believe was the story, but basically they wouldn't renew their lease because they asked about their water quality. And so, yeah, I mean, you should have rental rights. I know my county health department here was willing to go to bat for us with them and kind of twist the owner's arm that you really should be providing safe water. But I don't know, that's a very gray area, I'm sure, in most of the country, and not that it's right or it's fair, but what we learned through some of these experiences is that it could also be that the owner will just not renew your lease or ask you to leave. And I don't know what the ramifications are there, other than you'd be hiring a lawyer and having to deal with all of that. And I think in the end, a lot of people would not want to undertake that sort of level of effort, unfortunately, to make things right. So that's not a great answer, but it's the experiences I've had and know. And yeah, and again, I would go back and ask your county health department or local health district where you're at, what the situation is for this jurisdiction you're in. What are the best ways to drill holes, and what are the best materials? How to identify good water before building the well? I'm going to take this as someone who is a homeowner who wants to put in their own well, because a driller, I don't think, would say drill holes. They would, it's just not a way that, it's not the wording that people use. So I'm going to go with, we would recommend that anyone who wants to put in their own well don't, and use a licensed well driller. There are some states where that's the law, you have to. In Illinois, you're actually allowed to put in your own well if you are the landowner. but you still have to follow the drinking water or the well construction code in Illinois put out by the Illinois Department of Health. And unless you have a drill rig, unless you have access to the right types of materials, you're not going to be able to do that on your own. You know, a well driller who happens to own, is building a new house somewhere, they certainly can do that. They still have to file a log, all those things. It's really, we hear all kinds of issues related to this, related to people who put in their own well because they watched a YouTube video on how to put in, you know, a 20-foot well. Well, you get what you pay for, and if you put in an old sand point or you use a sledgehammer to put a 20-foot casing in the ground, no grout around the well, nothing to protect that area, you're asking for problems. You know, anything that's spilled nearby is going to end up in the well. We see this a lot in sandy areas along major river valleys, where people are putting in sand points because water's near the surface and it's a cheap way to go. You can buy the well kit at, you know, a farm and home store, but they're very dangerous. They're not protective. Anything near the surface is going to end up in that well. It's just not something to do on your own. So as far as the other part of that, identifying good water, you know, licensed drillers, and especially those that have been around a long time, have great records. They understand where there's water, where there isn't in their area. And so they're going to know if there's an aquifer there or what you might need. But if you want to find that information out on your own, whether there's groundwater at your location, what type of aquifer it might be, you know, agencies like mine have that. Our state, you know, I said here, contact your state geological survey or water resource agency in your state. So I mentioned DNR in Wisconsin, Department of Public Health in New York. All those folks, they have all the data on where aquifers are. A lot of them are mapped. Your USGS can help. In Illinois, the State Water Survey, we've mapped a lot of information, not only about the size and extent of aquifers, but also the water quality. And I went back and looked because I knew I showed examples in another webinar of a bunch of different states and the kind of information they have online. You can not only find your log, but also find where the aquifers are and what aquifer they're in, information about that. And it was a webinar we did on February 21st, 2024. And it was about how to find local information. And if you haven't seen that, I recommend you go back and watch that, because I know I used a few examples. Oklahoma's got a really great website that shows all of their geology, basically, and aquifers. Other states now, like California, where 10 years ago you couldn't get a well log unless you were the homeowner that on that property. Now all of that is public, and they developed a really great system, so you can find all the well logs they actually have the actual log for. So that's my advice there. Losing circulation. What does it mean on a well data sheet when a well driller says they lost circulation at a certain depth? So it's a little wordy because I was trying to, my experience is with a reverse rotary mud rig. And so how that works, and I'm not going to read this, but you use drilling mud, which you make with water and polymer and some kind of bentonite clay usually. So that's this thick, heavy, dense mud. And you pump it through the drill rod as it goes down, and it comes out through the drill bit, and then it comes up around the outside and lifts all the cuttings from what you've just drilled. So it's there, so that the well's always full of this drilling mud as you're drilling the hole, and that's to keep the sides from caving in. And so it's a circulation. When it comes back out, it goes into a pit where then the solids fall out, and then you pump from that same pit, and it goes back down through the drill rod, and so it's circulating this drilling mud the entire time you're drilling, and all the solids are falling out in this pit that you've created. Or sometimes it's not a pit, it's just a large steel tank that you bring with you. But so when you hit a unit, a geologic unit that's really it's like really coarse gravel, so thick mud can flow through that, or you hit a big fracture if you're in bedrock, then more of that drilling mud may flow out into the formation than you can add and fill in. And so then it stops circulating. And that's really bad for a number of reasons. One, that thick mud is there to keep the walls open, if you will, the walls of the hole you're drilling, so it doesn't cave in. And if it caved in when you're down at 200 or 300 feet, we had this happen to us, by the way. We hit these really big boulders after we were over 250 feet in the ground, and we were losing circulation. So we end up not having it. But what can happen then is the hole can cave in, and if your drill rod's down there, you can't get it out. You can't lift it through that. And so it's a really, you might lose a lot of rod, and that's very expensive. And you'd also then lose the hole. You'd have to start over. And so I guess that's what that means. And if there's any drillers on here, feel free to put information in the chat if I've explained something wrong. I worked on a drill rig for a summer, and it was a rotisserie mud rotary rig. Best summer of my life, just about, honestly. Wells run dry. Can private wells in Florida run dry? Well, that's the chance of a well running dry is from a number of things. It could be that you're in an aquifer that doesn't have many, usually this is a bedrock aquifer that doesn't have many fractures, and so it's called a low flow well, where if you pump it very hard, like at 5 gallons a minute, it may only have a sustainable yield of 1 gallon a minute. So if you start pumping it at 5 gallons a minute, pretty soon the water level is going to drop below your pump. And so then you ran out of water, you think your well's dry. An old hand dug well. I mentioned I grew up on a hand dug well. It was only 14 foot deep. We had livestock. Twice when I was a kid, I put a hose in the water tank, our horse tank, for our cattle and our horses, and walked away and forgot about it. And I pumped our well dry. And in that situation, when it's dry, if there's no rain, we didn't have water for 2 or 3 days. And then we did, it was all muddy looking and disgusting. The other thing that can happen is you could have other wells in the area that are lowering the water level below your pump. So especially if it's a high capacity well, like an irrigation well, you may have a home well and you're, a quarter mile from an irrigation system that's pumping 1,000 gallons a minute. It might drop the water level in the aquifer just below your pump. Your well isn't dry. It's actually that maybe your pump could be lowered and the well still has water in it, but it also could, if the well's not that deep, it could be dry until that pump shuts off and then it might come back. But the other thing is the characteristics of the aquifer. Is it a sand and gravel aquifer? What's the extent? If it's a bedrock aquifer, how much water can you pump? A lot of times on your well log, the driller will put in a temporary pump to initially to get all the drilling mud and stuff out of there that might have gotten the formation. And so if they're going to put in a 5 gallon a minute pump for your well at the end, they may put in a 15 or a 25 gallon a minute pump and try to pump it harder. One, that tells them that the well will produce at 5 gallons a minute, and two, it helps them get the well clean so they can finish up and stuff. But you have to know all those things to know why your well went dry. And if it's actually dry or just the pump, the water level went below the pump. And so there's just a lot to it. You need to, your well log would be a place to start if your well has, quote, went dry. Hopefully that helps. And this is the last question, and we'll get to the ones you might have asked. We got 10 more minutes here. So someone asked, I'd like to confirm the quality of water is not regulated for private wells, so I cannot fail an inspection on a private well if there is bacteria in the water, but just inform in my records that there is and let owners or buyers know. That's two totally separate things. This question was very frustrating in that, you're not regulated in what you drink from a well, but you are regulated in what you give to somebody else, or if you're going to sell a property, or if you're willing to drink water with bacteria, that's your choice. But clearly in this case, I don't think you are. You're just you have a well with bacteria and you don't want to clean it. So my parents sold our farm after I had been here for a number of years, and my dad shock chlorinated it twice or 3 times, I think, so that it would pass a one-time water test, knowing that that well would never be safe for anybody else. And that frustrated me to no end as well, because I explained all that to him and he just didn't listen. So there are 5 states that have rules. When a property is sold, you have to do a water test, and then that's shared with the owner and the buyer and the seller. I mentioned Rhode Island has a little stricter rule, but it's basically the same in that respect. Other states have legally binding questionnaires. So if you're going to sell your property, you're handed a questionnaire from a realtor. That's a legally binding agreement. You have to answer all the questions, and one of them is, I know nothing adverse about my well water or my septic system. And that's in Illinois. And so there there are cases here in Illinois where someone has lied on that form, and they actually go into court and having either to pay a big settlement to the person who bought the house, or had to fix the whole situation. But the most important thing here is that today, most mortgage companies and their lenders require a water test if they're using a lender like Sallie Mae or HUD or USDA. They have a lot of strict rules on a home, that if they're going to put their money into a home with a well, they want to make sure that it's potable water so that the value of the home doesn't go down once somebody tests and finds out it is. And so you can't really sell your home. There's a lot of people who wouldn't be able to buy your house if you did this, just because they're getting a loan from Sallie Mae or whatever federal program it might be, or most mortgage companies. We find mortgage companies all over the country that are doing this because they're protecting their investment. So what should happen is you should mitigate the problem or add treatment or do what you need to make sure it's safe, and let any buyers know about that. Same thing if it's arsenic or if it's any other constituent, you should sample yourself and find out if there's any issues before you even put it on the market. And if there are, you add the treatment to remediate that, so that when you put your home on the market, you can show that you've taken care of this, that the water's fine, that here's what that means, all those things. And we do a webinar for realtors once a year. If you go back through on our list of webinars that are on our YouTube page, you can find the realtors one. I can't remember when we did it, but it hasn't been that long ago. We talk about why, whether you're the buyer or the seller, here's the right thing to do and the right way to do it, because it won't affect your property values, and it still makes sure everyone's safe. So yeah, and you can email me if you're the person who asked this question. I'd be glad to talk to you more about it. And with that, there are a number of questions I didn't answer today because we've answered them just either, most of them on the 4/17/24 Well Care 101 webinar, asking about treatment for specific contaminants, the how-to and issues surrounding shock chlorination, what we know today about PFAS in private wells, and some of the basic questions about well and testing are also covered in our class. But if you go to the 4/17/24 webinar and go to the questions, we walk through the shock chlorination thing, and there's a document from Minnesota Department of Health that is wonderful and describes every kind of treatment, what it's used for, a lot of details that it's a great guide for anyone to have, especially if you're giving advice to well owners. It's a really complete document they put together from Minnesota Department of Health. So, and if you go through our other webinars, you'll find more questions and more answers from different folks that have been asked. So, and we've tried to put that all into the Help Center, but all of it's not there yet. So as far as questions asked today, I'm going to pull this over, and Sally and Katie, tell me if you can or can't see that.
I can see it.
Great. Okay, so the first question is KDHE, which is Kansas. Last recommendation I read said not to take a water sample from a swivel faucet, but almost all kitchen sinks are swivel now, so I have been taking them out of the bathroom. Should I go back to the kitchen sink? That's, and And are you talking about, I think this comes down to whether it's a homeowner doing it for their own benefit or if it's for some other reason. And I get that swivel faucets, they believe likely have some bacteria, like, you know, some, if you're, when you're working with water operators, they will tell you to take the little trap off the end and screw off the end of a sink faucet, because that's likely to be positive. But I guess my take on that is, if, you know, the sample comes back after you've been running water, if the sample comes back and you're actually not just doing positive or negative, but you're actually quantifying, then it should come back really low if it is, and then maybe go back and take a sample with that off. I mean, I don't know. I mean, every tap has issues, even the one in the bathroom. You know, does it have a thing that screws off? Because that's likely too to cause, could cause a bacteria hit. Yeah, and if this is anything regulatory, I really shouldn't give advice there, just because it's different in every state, and I know you all are pretty proactive with your program, and I still feel, and this is just my own opinion, that for a homeowner, they should take the sample where they're getting their drinking water. And in some cases, that's not the kitchen tap, it's their refrigerator, you know, or maybe they're getting their cooking water from their kitchen tap, but they're drinking water from a fridge, and that's a whole nother issue. Yeah, I don't know that I answered your question, but I'd say that if KDHE is telling you to do things a certain way, then that's probably what you should do. And yeah, they're in it actually collecting samples a lot more than I am. And so, yeah, I should probably talk to them about that and find out, maybe I should change my advice. So that's kind of where we're at, I think, with that. How to decrease acidity levels in well water. My water tested about 6 pH. We'd like it to land at 7. Well, sure. So there are things you can add to water to make it more alkaline. You'd want to talk to a treatment professional about that. pH of 6 isn't necessarily mean it's bad. What you need to do is test your water, because there's no reason for it to necessarily be at 7 exactly. There's no, that I know of, there's no advantage to the water that you're drinking being, you know, if it's in that range, and if it's 12 or it's 3, that's a different animal. But yeah, a lot of natural groundwater is below 6, and in Illinois, it's all 7.5 to 8, except, yeah, most of our aquifers are. So, but to increase the pH, you make it more alkaline, you know, there are certainly ways to do that. And I talked to a treatment professional about what might work in a home. And it's different for a community water supply, which is kind of where I'd be able to give better advice probably. My water is stream fed and piped into a small concrete reservoir at the source before being piped down to the house and filtered. So you're using a spring. I take it in a spring box. So the concrete reservoir spring box has medium-sized white worms with clumps of tiny black worms at the bottom. Should I be concerned, and what should I do? What are these worms likely to be? You know, I don't know what they might be, but any kind of live organism will create bacteria issues. So you don't want them in there. Is your concrete reservoir, yeah, the reservoir needs to be sealed. So that's when I said a spring box. There's, you know, they make those for people who are using springs for their water supply. And the other thing is you have to treat it like surface water. So what you, the real advice here is you really need to have constant disinfection, whether that's UV or chlorine. You need to have all the water in your home, coming into your home, disinfected, and not just, you know, not shock chlorinating one time, but having a chlorine feed or a UV system, so that you're killing any bacteria, viruses. I mean, yeah. But if you use UV, you can do more, I guess, because you shouldn't. There's no way to make that clean. And I don't know what the worms are, but I mean, it's amazing what you find out finding groundwater. There's actually a freshwater shrimp that's small as the size of the head of a pin, an ink pen, that can exist in shallow aquifers. And we had a person here in Illinois who sent me pictures and said, "What are these? They're on my filter," and they're freshwater shrimp in his well. So, but that's not good. And your water needs to be disinfected if you have live organisms in it, period. Okay, if I cannot locate a completion report or log from my well other than water quality, what are the most important pieces of information about the well, water table, or aquifer that I should try to determine to learn more about my well, and where should I try to find that information? I would start with the folks that house all the well records, and they can either provide you a lot of this information, or they will know who you want to talk to about water quality. You know, there's things you can do, right? You can to try to find the depth of your well, you can have a contractor do it. That will cost you some money. Or you could, it depends on if you have a submersible pump, then depending on how old the well is and how long you've lived there, there's probably records of someone coming and either dropping that pump or replacing the pump or doing some work on the pump. If you can find the plumber or contractor that did that work, they may know more information about your well. You can ask around if all your neighbors had their wells drilled by the same drilling company and your well looks just like theirs. It may be that you can contact a drilling company and they may have drilled your well or may have records. And the other thing, you know, even in the end, if there's no other information, if you're in an area where all the wells around you, and you can have access to those either from the state or, you know, talking to your neighbors or whatever, are all 150 feet deep and no one has any other kind of well, then it's very likely yours is also 150 feet deep. So you can use that information to try to understand what formation you're in and what the water quality is there. Because if you know the aquifer, in most states, they have some data on the water quality in each of those aquifers. And again, I would start with the agency that houses your well logs. And when I say agency, I mean at the state level. So like in Illinois, our county health departments regulate well construction. They go out when they're drilling a well, they get the completion report, but then a copy comes to us and we house all of them for the state for all 102 counties. And so, yeah, I don't think I've answered this really well, but yeah, and I'd be glad to help you with this if you want to contact us, find out what state you're in and who we might know there. We have contacts in most states, actually. We've worked on this program for 12 years now. And so we work with a lot of state agencies, and that might be a way to go as well. Should I UV filter water before or after the house pump and pressure tank? That's a really good question. I'm not sure. Oh, certainly after the pump. I mean, that's in the well. And I'm almost certain you do it when it first comes in. I know a little bit about UV filters. I know you need to have a regular filter in front of it so that there's no particulates affecting the UV, and you have to maintain it according to how it should be, or the light might not continue to work. But I'm not 100% sure if it goes before or after the pressure tank. I think it's before, because otherwise you'd have the bacteria and other things. You give them opportunity to grow in your pressure tank, and that's not a good thing. So, yeah, and again, I would talk to a treatment professional. And I mentioned treatment professionals a number of times. The Water Quality Association, that's WQA.org, they have a certification program for treatment professionals as well, as a certification program for devices. And so they, on their website, you can put in, I think, your zip code or look by state or whatever, and you can find a list of dealers that have actually went through their program. And, you know, it includes, and, you know, there's good and bad apples in every profession, but their program includes stuff on ethics and some other things that in theory would, you know, you'd have a better experience with that. We are not an accredited lab and we don't charge for water tests. Do you recommend that we stop testing and give to an accredited lab that is located here in town? We are not an accredited lab. I'm not sure I understand. So you're doing testing, but you're not accredited, which I understand that because the Water Surveys Lab follows all of the proper procedures, blanks, duplicates, the methods that are standard, all that stuff. But a number of years ago, when all the accreditation stuff kind of went haywire with all the requirements for reporting, we decided to not stay accredited. And so we haven't been accredited for, I don't know how long now. And I wrestled with that with this program even when we started, because, but sitting where I sit, where we're giving advice to people all across the country, my best advice is to have them use an accredited lab. Even though I do, and our lab has decided to stop doing private well samples from outside. We only do samples that are for our research projects internally. But so not being accredited doesn't mean it's the end of the world or that you can't do the job. We just tell people to use an accredited lab because that's actually the best advice we can give them, especially because we don't know what other lab they may use. You know, yeah, like I said, you may be in the exact same boat. You do everything the right way, you follow all the standard methods as they're written, you use the right equipment, you do blanks and dupes and all those things. You just haven't gone through the accreditation process, or in our case, we let it slide, or we let it ourselves go off of it because we didn't have the money to maintain 2 extra people it would have taken to do that. And as a small lab, that's where we're at. The fact that you don't charge doesn't really affect anything either way, I don't think. Yeah, we should probably talk, because you know, there's a wide range of places where your lab could sit, and I don't know what that is, but I mean, you're providing a service, especially because you don't charge. It's a service that may help some people if you're doing all the actual testing the right way. So, you know, kudos to you in that respect. I don't recommend you stop testing unless, you know, you're not doing all the things you need to be doing to ensure you're getting proper results and accurate results. That's really what it comes down to, I think. So I'm interested, though, to learn more about who you are and what you're doing if you're so willing. So thank you. I know we ran over, I apologize. Here's the information you need if you're looking for CEs. And again, you email us. And if you have any additional questions or comments, or you want to share more information, you can contact us at these email addresses. And I'm going to throw in my email. It's sdwilson@illinois.edu. Feel free to email me directly. Yeah, be glad to help. So, and I think when you get the email in an hour or two that says thanks for attending, that has my email address on it as well. So, so yeah, thanks for attending. Hopefully this was helpful, and everyone have a great day.